Welcome back, everybody. I'm Travis with Linux Academy. In this lesson, we'll be building on top of our compose file knowledge by introducing volumes and networking. We're going to start off by going and creating a new directory, execute make dir-p compose/ghost, and then go and navigate into compose ghost. We're going to go and create a new Docker compose file, so execute vi docker-compose.yaml. The contents of the compose file can be found in the description of this video. So I'm going to go and start from the very top. Should be some things that you're already familiar with. We are starting off this compose file with the version. We're setting to version 3. And what we're doing in this compose file is that we're creating a Ghost blog along with MySQL, which it will be using for the database. So 2 services, Ghost and MySQL. We're going to go and name the containers using the container name option. This is going to be called Ghost. This time, rather than going and building an image, we're going to go and supply one, which is going to be Ghost latest. We're going to go and map our ports, port 80 to 2368 on the container. That is the port that Ghost blog runs on. And then we have some environment variables that we're going to be setting up. Here we are setting up the database client, which is going to be set to MySQL. Over here with the database connection, this needs to match the name of the MySQL service. So MySQL and MySQL. We're going to be connecting to MySQL as the root user. Because we're connecting as root, we need to make sure that we supply the root user password. And this password here needs to match up with this one here. And finally, we're going to go and name the database, which is going to be called Ghost. Now let's talk about how to use volumes in the compose file. We use the volumes option to define a list of volumes that will be mounted into the container. And what I'm using here is known as the short syntax. You supply the source and then the target. Now, I don't have an example of how to use the long syntax in my Docker Compose file, so I pulled up the documentation so we can go and walk through it. If you're simply just mounting a source to a target, just use the short syntax. Docker is pretty smart about figuring out if you're using a volume versus a bind mount. However, if you need to supply additional options, then you want to use the long syntax. So just like with the short syntax, we go and define our volumes option. For the type, it can either be a volume, a bind mount, or tempfs. Next, we need to supply the source for the mount. This can either be a path on the host for a bind mount, or it could be the name of a volume. Next is the target. This is going to be the path in the container where that volume is going to be mounted to. Under the volume option, we can set no copy. If we're going and mounting a volume into a directory with files, we can supply this option and tell it whether it needs to copy the files that are in that directory over to the volume or not. For the Ghost blog, we're going to be creating a single volume, which is going to be called ghost-volume. And it's going to be mounted into var libghost. And this is the directory where Ghost stores its static content, such as images as well as templates. The network option allows us to go and define what networks our container is going to be attached to. For Ghost blog, it's going to be connected to 2 networks. The first one is the Ghost network, which is going to be the public-facing network. And then we have MySQL, which is what Ghost and MySQL will communicate over. You're being introduced to another new option called depends on. This allows us to go and define a service dependency between one or more services. The reason why this dependency is being set up, Ghost blog is responsible for creating the database, and if MySQL is not online, it's simply going to fail. The final service we're creating is for MySQL, and we need to ensure that the container is called MySQL because this is how Ghost blog is connecting to it. So we'll be using the container name option to ensure that it is called MySQL. Using the image option, we're going to make sure that we use the MySQL image and the 5.7 tag. We need to make sure that we set up the root password for MySQL because this is how Ghost blog is connecting to the MySQL database. So we have an environment variable, MySQL root password, which is going to be set to ps4 ssw0rd0 ! We do have data that needs to be persistent, so we are setting up a volume, and it's called MySQL-volume. And it's being mounted into var libMySQL. MySQL will be connected to its own network. So under the networks option, we're setting up the MySQL_network. And this is what Ghost blog will be using to communicate with the MySQL database. In order for Docker Compose to go and create a volume, we need to make sure that we use the volume top level key. However, if we are using a pre-existing volume, we don't need to define it here. This top level key is only used for volumes that are going to be managed by Docker Compose. Also, any kind of driver options that need to be specified are going to be defined within this section. So referencing the documentation here, under the volume's top level key, we have a volume called example, And here is where we go and define our driver options. And networks is going to function the same way. Under the network's top level key, we go and define the networks that Docker Compose will be managing. Going back and referencing the documentation, we have the ability to go and set up certain options for the network. For example, we can go and set the driver. Bridge is set by default, but we can change it and set to overlay, host, or none. We can also go and supply additional options, such as internal. If this is an internal network, we can set it to true. And then we can go and supply additional driver options. This allows you to go and configure a network as if you're executing the docker network create command. Go and save and quit. Let's go and bring these services online. Execute a Docker Compose up using the D flag to have these services run in the background. Now let's go and take a look at our Docker Compose services by executing Docker Compose PS. And you can see we have Ghost and MySQL, and both of them are up. So I should be able to go and execute curl localhost and get HTML back, which I do. Because we're working with networks and volumes, we should be able to go and list them. So first, go and execute a Docker volume ls. So here are my two volumes right here. The first one is ghost dash volume, and it's because we called this ghost dash volume, and then we have ghost MySQL dash volume. And now we're going to do the same thing for the networks, execute Docker network ls. And here we have the two networks that were being created by the Compose file. Because I'm not going to be able to cover all the options in Docker Compose, I do highly recommend you go and read the documentation. There will be a link in the description. That's all I have for this lesson. Go ahead and mark it complete.